What if I told you that Rome's greatest nightmare, the man who had kept Italy in fear for 15 years, lost a decisive battle because his opponent had mastered and copied his own tactics? For a decade and a half, the name Hannibal Barca was synonymous with terror for the Romans. He was a specter, a grand master of war who inflicted defeat after defeat on them on their own soil. But war, like any lesson, requires a capable student, and Rome proved to be the most capable of all. The final clash of the Second Punic War took place not in Italy, where Hannibal expected it, but on the scorched plains of Africa. It was not just a battle between two armies, it was a duel between two geniuses, an old master and a young challenger who dared to turn his teacher's weapons against him. The Battle of Zama was the moment when the student surpassed his teacher, and the echoes of this clash determined the fate of the Mediterranean for hundreds of years to come. Watch the video to the end to find out how one Roman commander cracked Hannibal's code, why war elephants proved useless, and how the tactics that brought Carthage its greatest victory at Cannae led to its ultimate downfall. I will reveal to you the most closely guarded secret of the Roman Senate at that time. They were terrified of one man, and this fear dictated their entire state policy. That man was Hannibal Barca. The Second Punic War began not as a campaign against Rome, but as Carthage's bold response to Rome's growing influence. Hannibal, whose hatred for Rome had been instilled in him since childhood, chose a strategy that no one could have foreseen. He decided to take the war to enemy territory, striking at the very heart of the Republic. His goal was not to wipe Rome off the face of the earth, but to destroy its system of alliances by showing Italian cities that their protector was no longer all-powerful. His legendary crossing of the Alps in 218 BC was not just a military maneuver, but a psychological blow. The Romans did not expect an enemy from the north, especially one with such an impressive army, which included war animals. This march immediately demonstrated Hannibal's genius for logistics and his ability to inspire his people to unimaginable feats. Every mile of this journey was a challenge to nature and human capabilities. He arrived in Italy weakened but ready for battle, and the Romans rushed to meet him, underestimating their opponent. The first clashes at Ticino and Trebia showed the Roman commanders that they were dealing with an enemy of a completely different caliber. Hannibal used the terrain, the weather, and his knowledge of the enemy's psychology. He lured the Romans into traps, using their own aggressiveness and overconfidence against them. The Roman legions, accustomed to victory in direct combat, found themselves disorganized and defeated before they even had time to understand the enemy's plan. These early victories allowed Hannibal to strengthen his position and win over his first allies from among the Gallic tribes. The next blow was the battle at Lake Trasimene. It was not a battle, but a classic ambush, one of the greatest in military history. Hannibal lured the entire Roman army under the command of Consul Gaius Flaminius into a narrow valley along the lake, blocking the exits. The morning fog, which he had anticipated, concealed his troops until the last moment. A sudden attack from the flanks and rear led to the complete defeat of the Romans, and the army ceased to exist. This catastrophe plunged Rome into shock and forced the Senate to resort to extreme measures. The appointment of a dictator. The culmination of Hannibal's military genius was the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, which has been included in all textbooks on tactics. Rome assembled the largest army it had ever fielded, determined to finish off the Carthaginian once and for all. Hannibal, outnumbered, accepted the battle. He deliberately weakened his center, allowing the superior Roman forces to break through. As the legions rushed forward, believing victory was near, Hannibal's elite troops on the flanks struck, and his cavalry, having defeated the Roman cavalry, closed the circle from the rear. The Roman army found itself trapped in what is known as a double envelopment. What followed was the greatest disaster in Roman history. Tens of thousands of soldiers were lost in a single day, including the consul and many senators. The psychological effect was devastating. It seemed that the city was doomed. Hannibal proved his tactical superiority in the most convincing way possible. He destroyed the army, but oddly enough, it was this event that laid the foundation for his future defeat, forcing Rome to completely rethink its approach to war. After Cannae, Hannibal, contrary to the expectations of his generals, did not march on Rome. Historians still argue about the reasons for this decision. It is likely that he did not have enough siege equipment and his army was exhausted. He expected Rome, broken and humiliated, to sue for peace. But Rome did not surrender. Instead, it adopted a new, exhausting tactic proposed by Fabius Maximus, nicknamed the Delayer, or the Delayer. Rome stopped engaging in open battles with Hannibal. This strategy, known as the Fabian strategy, was a war of attrition. The Romans followed Hannibal's army closely, attacking his foragers, intercepting his messengers, but avoiding a general battle. For Hannibal, this was the worst possible scenario. He was invincible on the battlefield, but his army was dwindling without reinforcements from Carthage. He was forced to feed his soldiers at the expense of Italian land, which turned the local population, whom he had come to liberate, against him. 15 years passed. Hannibal remained in Italy like a lion in a cage. He was a genius without a stage for his triumph. He won minor skirmishes but was strategically losing the war. Meanwhile, Rome licked its wounds, reformed its army, and, most importantly, trained a new generation of commanders. These young officers grew up studying not Roman victories but Hannibal's tactics. They analyzed Cannae, Trebia, and Lake Trasimene, trying to understand how he did it. Among these young officers was one who did not simply study Hannibal, but sought to surpass him. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was one of the few who survived Cannae, and that experience became his most important lesson. He saw the weaknesses of the Roman military machine and Hannibal's obsession with cavalry and maneuvering. While the old senators feared Hannibal, Scipio saw him as a teacher. He was preparing his response, and that response was not to be heard in Italy. We would be very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think Hannibal could have won if he had marched on Rome immediately after Cannae? Share your opinion in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our research. Are you ready to learn the truth about the man who dared to challenge Hannibal himself on his own turf? His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio, and his story is one of how tragedy and defeat can become the foundation for the greatest victory. He belonged to one of the most noble and influential families in Rome, the Cornelii. The war with Carthage was not an abstract political issue for him, but a personal tragedy. His father and uncle commanded Roman armies in Spain, and both fell in battle against Carthaginian forces. Scipio himself had been in the thick of events from a young age. He fought at Ticinus, where, according to legend, he saved his father. Later, he was a military tribune at Cannae. He witnessed firsthand the triumph of Hannibal's tactics and the complete fiasco of Rome's straightforward strategy. He witnessed how the legions, the pride of Rome, turned into a helpless mass, surrounded and destroyed by the enemy. This experience did not break him, but hardened him, giving him the understanding that Hannibal could only be defeated by abandoning the old Roman methods. After the death of his father and uncle in Spain in 211 BC, the situation there became catastrophic. Rome lost almost all of its possessions south of the Ebro River, and it seemed that Spain, the main source of silver and recruits for Carthage, was lost forever. No one in Rome wanted to take command of this hopeless army. The Senate was looking for a new proconsul, but experienced commanders remained silent, unwilling to risk their reputations. Then came the turning point. The young 24-year-old Scipio came to the forum and put himself forward as a candidate. It was an unprecedented act of audacity. He was too young and had not passed all the stages of the magistracy to claim such power. However, his charisma, his confidence, and the desperation of the senators did the trick. The popular assembly voted unanimously for him, granting him supreme military authority. Scipio went to Spain not just to avenge his family, but to test new ideas that he had been developing for years. Upon arriving in Spain, Scipio discovered the remnants of a demoralized army. The first thing he did was not to lead them into battle, but to begin intensive training. But these were not just exercises. He reformed the very principle of the Roman army. He realized that Hannibal's legion was flexible thanks to a combination of different types of troops. Scipio began to pay great attention to cavalry and light infantry, which the Romans traditionally considered secondary. He also understood the importance of intelligence and psychology. Hannibal always knew the Romans' plans and always attacked their weak points. Scipio began to build his own intelligence network, studying the terrain and interrogating prisoners and deserters. He analyzed the tactics not only of Hannibal, but also of his brothers and other Carthaginian commanders in Spain. He looked for their weaknesses, their habits, their standard tactics. One of the key elements that Scipio adopted from Hannibal was personal charm and the ability to inspire loyalty. He was not just a commander, he was a leader. He communicated with his soldiers, knew many of them by name, and shared their hardships. At the same time, he maintained an aura of chosen one, hinting at his special patronage by the gods. This created an aura of invincibility around him, which was so important in those turbulent times. Scipio also understood that the war in Spain was not only against Carthage, but also for the minds of the local Iberian and Celtiberian tribes. The Carthaginians ruled them harshly, relying on force and fear. Scipio chose a different tactic: mercy and diplomacy. He released prisoners, treated local leaders with respect, and honored their customs. He positioned Rome not as a new master, but as a liberator from the Carthaginian yoke. This strategy began to bear fruit. Tribes that had previously fought for Carthage began to waver, and some defected to Rome. Scipio gained not only new allies, but also valuable warriors, especially cavalrymen, which the Romans sorely lacked. He created a new type of army, flexible, motivated, and multinational, very similar to Hannibal's own army. Scipio prepared his first strike. He had no intention of getting involved in protracted battles with 3 Carthaginian armies that outnumbered him. He needed a quick, stunning success that would change the entire strategic balance in Spain. He targeted the heart of Carthaginian power in the region, the city of New Carthage. The way he planned this operation showed that Rome had gained a commander of a completely new caliber. In the next chapter, we will learn how Scipio took the impregnable capital of Carthage in Spain in one bold stroke, using not so much force as psychology and knowledge of nature. What I am about to recount broke all the rules of Roman warfare. Scipio decided to capture New Carthage, and the way he did it was pure genius, worthy of Hannibal himself. New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, was not just a city. It was Carthage's main operational base, arsenal, treasury, and warehouse in Spain. It stored military supplies, money to pay mercenaries, and, importantly, Spanish hostages who guaranteed the loyalty of local tribes. The city was considered impregnable. It was located on a peninsula, protected on 2 sides by the sea and on the 3rd by a deep lagoon. Only a narrow isthmus connected it to the mainland, and this isthmus was protected by a powerful fortress wall. The 3 Carthaginian armies scattered throughout Spain were confident in the safety of their capital. The commander of the garrison, Mago, relied on the walls and was confident that any attack would be doomed to failure. Scipio understood that a frontal attack would result in enormous losses. He spent the winter gathering information. His scouts, disguised as local fishermen, carefully studied the approaches to the city. They discovered one critically important detail that the Carthaginians had overlooked. The lagoon protecting the northern wall was very shallow and subject to strong tides. The locals said that at low tide, especially when there was a strong north wind, the water receded and the lagoon could be crossed on foot. This fact became the basis for a daring plan. Scipio decided to strike simultaneously from 2 sides. The main part of his army was to storm the main gate on the isthmus. This was a diversionary attack designed to draw the attention of the entire garrison. The soldiers were given assault ladders and were to attack with maximum determination, making Megan believe that this was the main attack. Meanwhile, a select detachment of 500 men with local fishermen as guides was to wait at the lagoon. At the signal, at low tide, they were to cross the lagoon and attack the northern wall. Scipio had calculated everything down to the smallest detail, including the psychological effect. He told his soldiers that the god Neptune would help them and personally lead them across the waters at low tide. The attack began. The Romans fiercely stormed the main gate, as planned. The Carthaginians repelled one attack after another. The sounds of trumpets, shouts, and the clang of weapons. All the garrison's attention was focused on this narrow section. Mago was confident that he had the situation under control. He had no idea that at that very moment, a Roman detachment was moving toward what he considered to be his impregnable northern wall. At the right moment, the water in the lagoon began to recede. Scipio's detachment, carrying ladders, moved across the shallows. The northern wall was virtually unguarded. The Carthaginians did not consider it necessary to keep large forces there. The Romans climbed the wall without much difficulty, overcame weak resistance, and found themselves inside the city. They immediately rushed to the main gate to open it from the inside for the main army. The effect was stunning. The garrison, attacked from two sides, panicked. Resistance was broken in a matter of hours. Scipio won a brilliant victory, capturing the city with minimal losses. He gained access to the arsenals, the treasury, and, most importantly, the hostages. And here he again proved himself to be a disciple of Hannibal. Instead of treating the hostages according to the laws of war, Scipio showed mercy and generosity. He gathered the Spanish chiefs and their families, addressed them with a speech, and sent them all home without demanding anything in return. This gesture made a much greater impression on the Spanish tribes than all the Carthaginian victories. They saw Scipio not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The fall of New Carthage was a turning point in the Spanish campaign. Scipio deprived the enemy of its main base and won the loyalty of the local population. He proved to his soldiers and the Senate in Rome that he was a new type of commander, capable of unconventional and bold decisions. He didn't just fight, he waged total war using intelligence, psychology, and diplomacy. His laboratory in Spain yielded its first brilliant results. If you like how Scipio thinks outside the box and breaks the mold, give this video a thumbs up. Guess what happened next? After capturing New Carthage, Scipio did not rest on his laurels. He spent the next 2 years strengthening his positions and training his army, preparing for the decisive battle. The Carthaginians, for their part, had no intention of giving up Spain. They assembled a new huge army under the command of Hasdrubal, son of Hanno. In 206 BC, the two armies clashed near the city of Ilipa. This battle was a dress rehearsal for Zama and a clear demonstration of what Scipio had learned from Hannibal. For several days, the two armies stood facing each other, hesitant to begin the battle. Hasdrubal arranged his army according to the traditional Carthaginian scheme. He placed his best, select African troops in the center and the less reliable Spanish allies on the flanks. Seeing this, Scipio spent several days arranging his army in exactly the same formation. His best Roman legions were in the center, and his Spanish allies were on the flanks. It was a psychological game. Scipio accustomed Hasdrubal to the idea that the battle would follow a predictable scenario. Center against center, flanks against flanks. Every morning the armies would line up, stand until evening, and then disperse. Hasdrubal was confident that Scipio would not dare to attack his strong center. He did not suspect that Scipio was setting a trap for him, using the same principle that Hannibal had used at Cannae. Finally, Scipio decided that the time had come. One day he ordered his men to wake up before dawn, eat, and prepare for battle. As soon as the sun rose, he led his army into the field. But this time, the formation was completely different. Scipio made an inversion. He placed his Spanish allies in the center and the elite Roman legions on the flanks. This was the first of his brilliant decisions that day. Hasdrubal, caught off guard by the early maneuver, was forced to hastily lead his army out of camp, without even allowing his soldiers to eat. Out of habit, he placed his Africans in the center and the Spaniards on the flanks, expecting Scipio's legions to stand opposite them. But he saw the exact opposite. His strong center was facing the weak center of the Romans, and his weak flanks were facing the strongest parts of the Roman army. But it was too late to change anything. Scipio implemented the second part of his plan, inspired by Hannibal. He ordered his center, consisting of Spaniards, to advance very slowly. At the same time, his flanks, where the legions were stationed, were ordered to advance as quickly as possible. The Roman army began to move not in a straight line, but in a horn shape, curved forward. It was a very difficult maneuver that required perfect discipline, which Scipio had been instilling in his soldiers for 2 years. The Roman legions on the flanks quickly crushed Hasdrubal's weaker Spanish allies. At the same time, the Carthaginian center, consisting of elite African veterans, was unable to come to their aid. They were tied up in battle with Scipio's weak Spanish center. which was advancing slowly but preventing the Africans from breaking out. Hasdrubal watched in horror as his flanks collapsed. The defeat at Aleppo was so complete that the Carthaginian military presence in Spain collapsed. Scipio became the master of the peninsula. Now that his rear was secure, he could implement his main strategic plan. What could Rome do now with such a commander? In the next chapter, you will learn about Scipio's most daring plan, which made the conservative Roman Senate shudder with horror. Returning to Rome in 205 BSC after a brilliant Spanish campaign, Scipio was greeted as a national hero. His popularity with the people was boundless, and he was unanimously elected consul. However, for Scipio, this was only the beginning. He had no intention of waging insignificant campaigns like others. He had one all-consuming plan: to end the Second Punic War once and for all, and he knew how to do it. He appeared before the Senate and proposed what seemed to most of the old senators to be pure madness. Scipio declared that the best way to drive Hannibal out of Italy was to stop fighting him in Italy. He proposed to take the war to enemy territory, land in Africa, and threaten Carthage itself. The logic was simple. As long as Rome fought on its own soil, Hannibal would remain there. But as soon as Rome threatened the walls of Carthage, its government would be forced to recall its best general to defend the homeland. This proposal caused a storm of indignation. The leader of the opposition was the man who saved Rome after Cannae, Fabius Maximus the Slow. Fabius was old, respected, and embodied the old cautious tactics. He considered Hannibal to be the main and only threat. He accused Scipio of youthful bravado and adventurism, stating that Italy could not be left defenseless, while the Carthaginian lion still roamed its lands. The dispute between Fabius and Scipio was not just a dispute over tactics. It was a clash between two generations, two philosophies of warfare. Fabius represented the old Rome, which relied on perseverance and defense. Scipio represented the new, aggressive, and flexible Rome, ready to take risks and learn from the enemy. He understood what Fabius did not see. Hannibal in Italy was no longer so much a military force as a symbol, a ghost of Cannae. The real war had to be fought for control of the sea and resources. The Senate was hesitant. Fabius' arguments were compelling, and the risk was indeed enormous. If the African expedition failed, Rome could lose its army and navy, leaving it alone to face Hannibal. But Scipio, the conqueror of Spain, also commanded great authority. In the end, a compromise was reached, which was essentially a test for the young consul. He was not given an army for the invasion. He was given Sicily as a province and allowed to invade Africa, but on one condition: he had to do so without harming the Republic. This meant that he did not receive new legions recruited in Italy. He was given command of 2 legions that were stationed in Sicily. These were penal troops, the remnants of armies defeated at Cannae and other disasters. They were considered disgraced and had been exiled to the island until the end of the war. For another commander, this would have been an insult, but Scipio saw it as an opportunity. He had at his disposal thousands of hardened veterans who not only wanted to fight, but were eager to wash away the shame of defeat. They were the perfect material for his plans. He spent a whole year in Sicily, not only training these soldiers, but also building an army from scratch. He built a fleet, gathered supplies, and conducted diplomatic negotiations. He didn't just train them. He instilled confidence in them and reformed their structure, making the legions even more flexible than before. He personally selected officers, promoting the talented rather than the noble. He gathered volunteers from all over Italy, attracting them with his fame and the promise of rich spoils. He created an intelligence network in Africa, finding contacts among those dissatisfied with Carthaginian rule. One of his greatest diplomatic successes was winning over the Numidian Prince Massinissa. The Numidians were the best cavalrymen in the world and formed the main striking force of Hannibal's army. Massinissa had his own score to settle with Carthage. Scipio formed a secret alliance with him, promising him the throne of a united Numidia in exchange for his support. It was a move that would determine the outcome of the war. In 204 BC, having assembled an army and a fleet, Scipio was ready. He sailed from Sicily, leaving behind all the doubts of the Senate. He was going all in, knowing full well that if he failed, he would face exile at best and death at worst. He led his army of veterans, thirsting for redemption, to challenge the empire on its own soil. He was going to lure Hannibal out of his Italian fortress. Are you ready for the shocking truth? When Scipio landed in Africa near Utica, Carthage, which had been waging war in Italy and Spain for nearly 2 decades, found itself completely unprepared to defend its own land. Panic gripped the wealthy city. The inhabitants, who knew of war only through stories and taxes, now saw Roman legions at their gates. This was exactly what Scipio had hoped for. The psychological effect of the invasion was enormous. The Carthaginians hastily assembled an army to oppose Scipio. This army was led by Hasdrubal, son of Hanno, the same one who had fled Spain, and Syphax, king of Numidia, an ally of Carthage and enemy of Massinissa. They set up 2 separate camps near the Roman positions. Scipio found himself outnumbered and in a precarious position. The winter passed with fruitless negotiations and minor skirmishes. But Scipio would not have been Scipio if he had not sought an unconventional move. His scouts reported that the Carthaginian and Numidian camps were built mainly of wood and reeds, highly flammable materials. Under the pretext of peace negotiations, he sent his centurions to the enemy camps several times. In reality, they were experienced scouts who sketched the layout of the camps and marked the location of the guard posts. One night, Scipio put his plan into action. He divided his army into 2 parts. He ordered the first part to secretly approach the Numidian camp and set it on fire from all sides. The plan worked perfectly. The dry buildings burst into flames like gunpowder. Unimaginable panic broke out in Syphax's camp. The Numidians, thinking it was an accidental fire, ran out of their tents without weapons or armor, trying to save themselves. At that moment, Scipio's soldiers, who had surrounded the camp, sprang into action. They did not let anyone escape, and the panic turned into a rout. The Carthaginians in the neighboring camp, seeing the glow, also decided that it was an accidental fire. Many of them ran out without weapons to help their allies. Then the second part of Scipio's army, which he had kept in reserve, attacked them. This night attack became one of the most successful and rapid operations in Roman history, almost completely destroying 2 enemy armies. This victory, known as the Battle of Utica, was decisive. Syphax was defeated and soon captured. Massinissa, Scipio's ally, gained control of his Numidian cavalry, giving the Romans the long-awaited superiority in this branch of the military. Carthage was in despair. Now they had no field armies left in Africa, and the Romans were ravaging their lands unopposed. There was no one left to defend the city. And then the Carthaginian Senate made the only possible decision. They sent messengers to Italy with an order that Hannibal had probably been expecting and fearing all these years. He was ordered to immediately end the Italian campaign and return to Africa to defend his homeland. It was the most difficult moment in the career of the great commander. He, who had never lost a major battle, was forced to leave enemy territory not as a victor, but as a recalled savior. According to legend, Hannibal was furious, but he obeyed. In 203 BC, he loaded the remnants of his veterans, the old guard who had accompanied him throughout Italy, onto ships and sailed away from the land that had been his home for 15 years. He left undefeated but strategically defeated. He knew that Scipio had outplayed him, not by engaging him in battle, but by striking at his most vulnerable spot, his own home. The 2 greatest commanders of the era finally found themselves on the same continent, on the same battlefield. Hannibal, an experienced master, was forced to fight with a hastily assembled army on unfamiliar ground. And Scipio, a young contender, at the head of a battle-hardened, motivated army, fighting on terms he himself had chosen. A decisive clash was inevitable. What would their composition be? In the next chapter, we will examine the armies that clashed on the plain at Zama. In the fall of 202 BC, 2 armies met on the sun-scorched plain near the town of Zama. The location was not chosen at random. It was open terrain, ideal for the use of cavalry and elephants. Before the battle, an event took place that became legendary. Hannibal requested a personal meeting with Scipio. The 2 greatest commanders of their time, enemies who had never seen each other face to face, met accompanied by a small number of interpreters between the two armies. It was an incredible moment. The aging Hannibal, the man who shook the foundations of Rome, and the young Scipio, the man who had studied his every move and now threatened his hometown. Hannibal wanted to use what he considered to be his advantage in war animals, while Scipio was confident in the superiority of his cavalry under the command of Massinissa. At stake was not just victory in battle, but the fate of Rome and Carthage. The content of their conversation, as recounted by historians, resembles a philosophical dialogue on the nature of war and fate. Hannibal is said to have spoken of the vicissitudes of fortune. He cited himself as an example, a man who had stood at the gates of Rome and was now forced to beg for peace on his native soil. He offered Scipio peace on terms favorable to Rome. Carthage would renounce Spain, Sicily, and Sardinia. He warned Scipio against the pride that victory brings. Scipio, however, was not a man who could be moved by words. He was polite but firm. He reminded Hannibal that Rome had already offered peace, but Carthage had broken the truce. Now that Scipio was on the verge of complete victory and Hannibal was trapped in Africa, Rome dictated the terms. He rejected Hannibal's offer. Peace could only be earned through complete and unconditional surrender. The negotiations failed. Both commanders returned to their armies, knowing that tomorrow would decide everything. Let's take a look at the forces they brought to this field. Hannibal's army was heterogeneous. It numbered, according to various estimates, between 36 and 50,000 infantrymen, several thousand cavalrymen, and more than 80 war elephants. It was the largest army he had ever fielded, but its quality was questionable. Hannibal arranged it in 3 lines, which was unusual for him. The first line consisted of mercenaries, Ligurians, Gauls, and Moors. They were experienced fighters, but their loyalty was questionable. The second line consisted of hastily recruited Carthaginian and African militiamen. They were cannon fodder who were supposed to take the first blow and wear down the Romans. And only in the third last line, in reserve, stood his veterans from Italy. These were hardened fighters who had crossed the Alps with him and were victorious at Cannae. Hannibal kept them as his last decisive argument. Hannibal's cavalry stood on his flanks, but this was no longer the invincible cavalry he had in Italy. His Numidian allies had either been defeated or had defected to Scipio. What he had was significantly inferior to the Roman cavalry. His main striking force, his shock weapon, was to be 80 elephants, which he placed at the front of his formation. They were to break through the Roman ranks and sow panic. Scipio's army was more compact, but also of higher quality. He had about 30,000 infantrymen, his legions of veterans from Spain and Sicily, battle-hardened and infinitely loyal to their commander. They were disciplined and perfectly mastered the new, flexible tactics of the maniples. But Scipio's main trump card was his cavalry. On one flank stood the Roman cavalry under the command of his friend Lelius. On the other flank stood the best cavalry in the world, 6,000 Numidians under the command of their new king, Massinissa. For the first time in this war, Scipio had an undeniable advantage in cavalry. He was ready to respond to Hannibal with his own weapons. His entire battle strategy was built around this superiority and one ingenious tactical trick against the elephants. On the morning of October 19, 202 BC, the armies were lined up. The battle began with Hannibal's move. He gave the order, and 80 war elephants, trumpeting loudly, moved to attack the Roman ranks. It was a fearsome sight, designed to terrify the enemy. In Italy, this tactic often worked. The elephants were supposed to break through the legionnaires' formation, trample them, disrupt their ranks, and create gaps into which the infantry could rush. But Scipio was not Gaius Flaminius. Not only did he expect this attack, he had prepared for it. During his time in Africa, he had studied the habits of these animals and developed countermeasures. And on this day, he employed his most famous tactical innovation. Usually the Roman legion was arranged in a checkerboard pattern, quincunx, where the maniples, troops of different lines, covered each other's gaps, creating a solid but flexible wall. At Zama, Scipio ordered the legion to be formed differently. He arranged the maniples not in a staggered formation, but one after another in a column. This created wide open corridors between his units, running the entire depth of his formation. These corridors were only lightly covered by rows of light infantry, the Velites. It was a trap, and Hannibal unwittingly led his elephants straight into it. When the elephants approached, the Romans implemented the second part of their plan. On Scipio's orders, the entire Roman army let out a deafening roar. Hundreds of trumpets, horns, and bugles sounded. Soldiers beat their swords against their shields. This unimaginable cacophony, designed specifically to disorient the animals, had the desired effect. Some of the elephants, especially the young and poorly trained ones, became frightened and turned around. In a panic, they rushed back toward their own troops. They crashed into the ranks of Hannibal's Numidian cavalry on the left flank, completely disrupting their formation. This was Scipio's first success, achieved even before his soldiers entered the battle. He used Hannibal's weapon against him, turning his shock tactics into chaos in his own ranks. Another larger group of elephants continued the attack, but here too, a surprise awaited them. Roman Velites armed with javelins met them with a hail of projectiles. Attacking from the flanks, they directed the enraged animals into the very corridors that Scipio had prudently left open. The animals, seeking the least resistance, rushed into these empty passages. They ran through the entire depth of the Roman formation like water through a sieve, causing almost no harm to the legionaries. The soldiers in the columns simply stepped aside and let them pass, showering them with javelins from the sides. After running through the army, the elephants found themselves in the rear, where servants and light troops were already waiting for them, catching or leading them away from the battlefield. Thus, Hannibal's main striking force was completely neutralized. This first stage of the battle was a clear victory for Scipio. He not only withstood the attack on which Hannibal had pinned such high hopes, but he did so with minimal losses and maximum tactical elegance. He demonstrated that careful preparation, innovation, and psychology can defeat brute force. The field was cleared of elephants, and now the real battle was about to begin. The neutralization of the elephants had another immediate effect. The panic that the retreating animals caused on Hannibal's left flank gave Massinissa the perfect moment to attack. His Numidian cavalry, seeing the confusion of the enemy, immediately rushed forward. At the same time, on the right flank, Lelius' Roman cavalry attacked the Carthaginian horsemen. The cavalry battle that Scipio had been waiting for so long had begun. Scipio's plan worked flawlessly. Hannibal's first and most dangerous trump card had been defeated. Now the Roman commander could move on to the second phase of his plan, to destroy the enemy's cavalry and prepare the ground for the decisive blow. The Battle of the Elephants ended before it had even begun. The Battle of Men was beginning, and it promised to be long and hard. Once the threat of the elephants had passed, and some of them had thrown Hannibal's left flank into confusion, Scipio gave the order to his cavalry. On the Roman left flank, Massinnissa's Numidians attacked the disorganized Carthaginian cavalry. On the right flank, Lelius's Roman cavalry attacked their counterparts. The superiority of Scipio's horsemen, both in quality and morale, was undeniable. The Carthaginian cavalry, already inferior to the Roman cavalry, could not withstand the coordinated attack. On both flanks, they were quickly overturned and fled. Massinissa and Lelius, as ordered, immediately began the pursuit, leading the enemy cavalry far from the battlefield. This was part of Scipio's plan. He deliberately exposed his flanks to deprive Hannibal of his cavalry support. Now the battle turned into a purely infantry battle, as at Cannae, but with one important difference. Hannibal, seeing that his cavalry was defeated, could only rely on his infantry. He moved his first line forward, the mercenaries. Scipio responded by ordering his legions to advance. The two lines collided, and a fierce battle began. The Roman legionaries, more disciplined and better trained, began to slowly but surely push back the mercenaries. The fighting was fierce, but Hannibal's first line began to give way. The mercenaries, suffering losses and seeing no support, began to retreat. They tried to find cover behind the second line, the Carthaginian militia. Then Hannibal made a move that many historians think was either genius or just plain desperate. He told his second line not to let the retreating mercenaries pass, but to meet them with their spears. He didn't want the panic of the retreating soldiers to mess up his second line. This led to chaos. The mercenaries, finding themselves between the Romans in front and the spears of their allies behind, flew into a rage. They began to fight both the Romans and the Carthaginians. For a time, an unimaginable melee ensued in the center of the Carthaginian army. Scipio's Romans took advantage of this and intensified their attack. Hannibal's second line, attacked by both the Romans and the remnants of the first line, also faltered and began to collapse. Scipio ordered his legions not to pursue the fleeing enemy. He saw the main threat ahead of him, Hannibal's third line. His veterans, the old guard, stood motionless, fresh and ready for battle, watching the first two lines perish. These were the very soldiers who had won at Cannae. Scipio halted his army and reorganized his ranks. His soldiers were exhausted from fighting two lines. Now they faced their most difficult test. Two elite infantry forces of antiquity clashed in a decisive battle. Hannibal's veterans against Scipio's veterans. It was a battle of equals. The Romans, using their tactics with short gladius swords, tried to break through the wall of spears of the Carthaginian veterans. The battle went back and forth, and no one could gain the upper hand. The front line stabilized, turning into a brutal, exhausting battle. Hannibal was close to turning the tide of battle with the strength of his best soldiers. And at this most critical moment, when the outcome of the battle hung in the balance, dust appeared on the horizon. It was cavalry. But whose? To Hannibal's horror, it was not his horsemen. It was the Roman and Numidian cavalry of Lilius and Massinissa. They had stopped their pursuit and, obeying Scipio's orders, returned to the battlefield at the most crucial moment. The defeat at Zama was absolute. The Carthaginian army, Hannibal's last hope, ceased to exist. The losses were enormous, while the Romans lost relatively few men. The battle demonstrated not only Scipio's tactical genius, but also the superiority of the Roman military machine, which was able to adapt, learn, and become stronger after the most terrible defeats. Hannibal himself narrowly escaped capture and fled to Carthage. Upon arriving in the city, he appeared before the Senate and, according to legend, publicly admitted defeat for the first time in his career. He declared that he had lost not just a battle, but a war, and advised the Carthaginians to immediately accept any peace terms Rome offered. For a city that had believed in his genius for 15 years, this was a crushing blow, but they had no other choice. Scipio stood at their gates with a victorious army. The terms of the peace treaty, dictated by Scipio and later ratified by the Senate, were humiliating and marked the end of Carthage as a great power. Carthage lost all its overseas possessions, including Spain. It was forced to hand over almost its entire navy to Rome, with the exception of 10 patrol ships. It was imposed a huge indemnity, which it had to pay to Rome over a period of 50 years. But the most severe and humiliating clause was the one that prohibited Carthage from waging any war outside Africa, and in Africa only with Rome's permission. This effectively deprived the city of its sovereignty and made it completely dependent on the will of its conqueror. In addition, Rome guaranteed the independence and territorial integrity of its ally Massinissa, who became king of United Numidia. This created a constant threat at Carthage's borders, controlled by Rome. The Second Punic War was over. Scipio returned to Rome with a triumph unprecedented in history. He brought back untold riches and put an end to the most terrible threat the Republic had ever faced. The grateful people and Senate honored him with the nickname Africanus. He became the first Roman commander to be named after the land he conquered. As for Hannibal, his fate was tragic. He was not executed. He remained in Carthage and even attempted to carry out reforms, becoming suffet, the highest magistrate. He fought corruption among the oligarchs, trying to find the means to pay the tribute to Rome. However, his activities earned him many enemies, both in Carthage and in Rome, where he was still feared. In the end, under pressure from the Romans, he was forced to flee his hometown. Scipio's victory at Zama was a triumph of adaptation, discipline, and strategic foresight. It was a battle in which the student not only equaled the master, but surpassed him, using his own techniques, perfected to perfection. Rome learned from its most bitter mistakes, and in Scipio produced a commander capable of defeating the invincible Hannibal. What other great battles or commanders do you think changed the course of history by learning from their enemies? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new episodes.